and welcome to the Bitcoin Butlers podcast. I am Mike Watkins, and with me, as always, is my good friend and business partner, Matt Burke.
Hello.
And each week, we try and bring you an intellectually honest discussion about news and events affecting Bitcoin. If you like our content, please like, subscribe, and share. So, this week seemed like a very slow week with not as much news as usual. But one thing that we can certainly see is that change is coming. I think one of the announcements that didn't get much attention, but that is very significant, is the news on FedNow. So FedNow is the Federal Reserve's payment platform, and it was announced that it should launch between May and July of 2023, which is our first hard date that we've seen on this. So Matt, what do you know about this platform?
So essentially, FedNow is an instant payment system that you could think of the same way you would think of like a Venmo or PayPal or Zelle. The difference is that this allows direct instant transfers between businesses, between consumers and businesses, or from consumer to consumer that will settle essentially instantly for very little money. So what's happened in this space is that, as you've seen, I think Zelle is a good example. Zelle is basically a payment service that's owned by the banking industry, but your bank has to participate in it in order for you to be able to utilize it. But with Zelle, you can send money from one bank account to another, essentially by using just a phone number or an email address, and it does settle very quickly. The difference here is that everyone is included. You don't have to be a member bank, or if you compare it to something like Venmo, you don't have to have a Venmo account or a PayPal account in order to participate. All you have to have is a bank account, and it will be an option for people with a bank account to be able to transact directly with other people at any time. And I think historically, they call this the interchange fee, which is when banks pay between each other. There's like roughly a 23 cent or so charge on average. This is going to bring that charge down to like 5 cents. So it's going to be much less expensive, instant settlement, and anybody with a bank account can participate without having to sign up for a separate service.
Yeah, so I have a number of questions on this, but I guess I'm really curious about why you think they are trying to launch this. What do you think the objective is behind this?
Well, I think it's a few things. I think one is that they see that there's this kind of fragmented space of instant payments, and it was an opportunity for them to get directly involved. I think it also, in a way, ties into the possibility of a future CBDC, although they've come out and said very clearly, this is not related to a CBDC. We actually think this might postpone the need for a CBDC. So it's not its own currency or token. It's not blockchain based. There are still many third parties involved. So I think it was just, if nothing else, a way to try to make payments between parties more efficient than it currently is and less expensive.
Well, those are certainly options, and it seems like they're trying to. One of the ways that I saw it is they're trying to counter some of the arguments that one might have for Bitcoin, and I'm going to include in that crypto. So that if I want to send you a payment, let's just say that I'm picking up some groceries late at night, and for whatever weird situation, right? So it's 11:30 at night. I'm at the grocery store, and I see that you've got a green, I don't know, some kind of exotic car or some kind of a car that I wanted to buy. And I said, I've been wanting one of those cars for a long time. Would you consider selling it? The person says, yeah, I would sell it to you. I was sure. And you want to pay, I'm just going to make up a number, $20,000 for this car. Well, at 11:30 at night, and let's say it's on a Friday night where the banks won't be open for a couple of days, you couldn't do anything with it. You certainly could not wire the fund or give that person guaranteed funds until you had a bank involved. But if you had Bitcoin, you can send that Bitcoin 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. There's never not an ability to send it, and that will settle in about an hour, maybe less.
Mhm.
And so I think, and I'm basing this on sort of the information they released, which is they brought up a situation where if you needed a cashier's check, you could, you
This
could
would be the
essentially
equivalent of
get
that. Yeah.
equivalent even when a bank is closed. So it seems like they're trying to counter some of the arguments for Bitcoin. I don't know how much this does it. And I also don't know if this is the camel's nose under the tent, so to speak, in order to test out a payment service that they can use later for a CBDC. And for people that aren't familiar with the CBDC, a CBDC is a central bank digital coin. And one of the well, there are a number of problems with central bank digital coins. I think we can leave that for another episode.
Sure.
But when I see a government entity saying, no, 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 this isn't about a central bank digital coin, and this is actually going to help delay a central bank digital coin, you always have to take the opposite of what they're saying. Because a lot of times the opposite is really true. They always say, well, no, 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 we're not going to do that. And then, 6 months later, a year later, 2 years later, they do it. And they say, well, they just kind of pretend like they didn't say it. And the problem is that, historically, the problem would have been that there is no alternative money. So if the Fed had full control of the money, there was nothing you could do. And now we do have payment alternatives, which is going to be something that's going to come up in some of our other stories tonight. So I'm a bit confused here why they're doing this.
I think there are a few things there. So the reasoning I gave you as to why they're doing it is that is I would say the innocent version of what they're doing. That's the best case scenario. Lael Brainerd, who's one of, I think, the vice chair of the Federal Reserve, said this in the article that I was reading: the shift to real-time payment infrastructure requires a focused effort, but the shift is inevitable. So, they're acknowledging at that point that we're dealing with a change in the way that payments are being made. And they realize that the way that that's happening now for real-time payments without third parties involved is happening really in the cryptocurrency space more than anywhere. So I think that that's one kind of clue that they see this as a way to kind of get in the game in terms of that instant settlement. But the other thing is that what it also does is that it gives an increased level of financial surveillance to the government, because now you've got the Federal Reserve involved in all of these transactions between parties, especially if you're talking about transactions that might have happened in cash or in checks or money orders, or things that have a little more privacy related to them. There's going to be none of that here. So I think that that's another thing. And when you compare it to Bitcoin or potentially other digital currencies that are focused on privacy, those are still going to be a far better solution than using a FedNow type of system. They're correct that 24/7, 365 availability of it is convenient. The fact that it's not a blockchain means that you don't have the ability to actually publicly audit transactions the way you can with Bitcoin, which is also something that allows them to hold all the information that could be useful.
I also think they want to get apps on people's devices, right? So to use this, I believe you have an app. And I also think it certainly could be a test run for a CBDC, getting people used to using, essentially you get people used to using an app to do these things. And you can just make this little change and say, okay, well, instead of using dollars now, you're going to be using a CBDC going forward. People have already been using the app for a couple of years, and maybe it won't be that big of a difference or that big of a change for them. But I think we're going to have to see how this one plays out. I thought it was, I thought it was a really huge announcement that didn't get a lot of attention.
Yeah, it's kind of. I think it's been a little bit on the down low. I don't know if they're making it that big of a deal. I guess the fact that it's not happening until May at the earliest, which is what 9 months from now, um, maybe makes it a little bit less exciting to talk about until it happens. It's another one of those here's what we're going to do type of things versus here's what we've done. But I think that it's something that we really need to watch. I can tell you that from my standpoint, if I have the choice between making an instant payment to somebody using a Federal Reserve product versus a Bitcoin or Lightning based product, there's not really a question in my mind as to which one I would prefer to use from a privacy standpoint and from a reliability standpoint. The other thing is that this doesn't do anything to fix the money. It just helps more people pay each other quicker and cheaper.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that this is something that should have been around 5 years ago, that they're super late to this, or even late, earlier than that. That we have got all these other competing platforms that can do things that essentially the banks cannot. And then there's also the concept that in the year 2022, I can't send money from my account to your account instantly. I
Right.
mean, I can do it for a small amount, but I can't do it for a significant amount.
That's right. If you even with Zelle, they put limits on how much you can send in any given transaction. I actually had some painting work done on my house and paid the painter with Zelle, and I had to pay him 2 days in a row because they wouldn't let me send the full amount that I owed him in one day. So, I don't know how that's going to work here in terms of limits or censorship, but that's the other thing is that it seems like it would be fairly easy once people are using this platform for it to become pretty censorable. If the Federal Reserve doesn't like who you're paying or how much you're paying, it's probably a flick of a switch for them to have some say in that.
Mm-hmm. And that's a very scary thing, because one of the things that is so important is having choice. I don't care what it is. The difference between private companies and government entities is that when you're dealing with a private company, there's always a choice. If UPS, if your business is using UPS to deliver packages and UPS doesn't do a good job, you can switch to FedEx or DHL or USPS. But when you don't have a choice, which is what you have, like if you're going to Department of Motor Vehicles, there's only one place to get a driver's license. So what happens? You line up for who knows how long. The service you get is always terrible. And there's nothing you can do about it because you don't have an option. So having options is really important to driving quality and value to consumers and other businesses. And you could have a situation with this FedNow app where if you get censored, even if you get censored accidentally, right? Like your account
Mhm.
gets locked for some reason, and who knows how long it takes for some bureaucrat essentially to unlock your account if you can ever get it unlocked.
Sure.
So we're gonna watch this one. I think we're gonna. I actually for I'm gonna put a link up in our description for some a video for
Yep.
FedNow. They've actually made some videos. They're short. They're about 3.5 minutes each, and we'll include a link in there for anyone that wants to see how they're pitching it and how they're saying it'll work. There's nothing particularly innovative there. You're not really getting anything you couldn't have before. It's almost just like the Fed playing catch up, in my opinion.
Yeah. I watched some of those videos and had the same takeaway. They were very easy to digest, meaning that you watch it, you get a sense of what they're trying to do. I think you know they did a good job on the marketing side of that, but that tells you a little bit more about they want everybody to just be like, okay, this is awesome.
Right, right. And I didn't see any innovation in there. I didn't see anything where it's like, oh wow, this is really like you can do these things. I mean, even the idea, I mean, the example I gave earlier, buying a car in a parking lot, that's unlikely to happen to almost everybody. Although it
Sure.
did happen to a friend of mine.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a parking lot, it was just a friend of his that wanted to sell a car, and he had cash around, he bought the car late at night one night.
Yeah, well, we will keep an eye on that one and see. I think it's certainly a step that the Fed is taking towards what I would call kind of the next generation of payments.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the other thing I was thinking of. It's, I would view this because it's really not a push towards a CBDC overtly, at least yet. Um, if anything, it's more of a move against something like the Lightning Network than it is against Bitcoin. If that makes sense, just because
Sure.
it's a Lightning is an instant settlement network, that payment network that costs virtually nothing, and this is pretty much the same thing.
Right. I was thinking the same thing. 5 cents a transaction. Lightning Network is less than a penny a transaction. But I think for a lot of merchants and a lot of people, the difference between 1 cent or less than 1 cent and 5 cents is
It's
not
negligible.
much. Yeah, it's negligible.
All right, well, let's move on. The next, there's kind of 3 slides in a row that make up our next topic. The first one was that Iran greenlights Bitcoin and crypto payments for imports. So they are, and Iran is one of these countries that, in the same way as China, first they love Bitcoin, then they hate it, then they ban it, then they unban it, then mining's bad, then mining's good. It's kind of like they can't make up their mind on it. We talked, I think, either last week or the week before about that they're trying to put some more framework in place to kind of accept it into the society in terms of regulating it and regulating mining. But here, what they've done is they've said they're going to allow Bitcoin to be used for payments for imports, which is clearly a way for them to avoid sanctions and being kind of alienated from the global financial system because of the way they behave on the world stage.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I guess I'll just flip to the next one too, because then we'll talk about Iran and Russia together. And then Russia is saying that crypto is a safe alternative for cross-border payments, that they're open to using digital currencies to be able to accept international payments. I would assume that applies certainly to energy and other things that they're selling abroad. We've seen them put limitations on how they get paid for their energy supply, and now that they're saying that they would consider using crypto as a safe alternative for that. And again, they've been sanctioned to the hilt since the invasion of Ukraine, and they've been excluded from the SWIFT banking system, which is a lot of how global international finance operates.
Yeah, these are all. It's almost would you say these two stories are almost the same story?
They are pretty much the same story. And what they're essentially saying is that if we're going to be excluded from everybody else's network, then we're going to use a decentralized agnostic network to be able to accomplish the same thing.
Right, but and correct me if I'm wrong here, but this is only for purchasing from outside the country or buying imports. It's not for trade within the country.
Correct. It's for cross-border payments.
Right. So they want inside the country. Iran is still not very hot on Bitcoin. Neither is Russia.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want you. They don't say, "Oh, this is a great way to do things." They just said, "Okay, well, we have to navigate the waters that we can. We can't participate in the SWIFT system. So, okay, we'll use a different system." And the system they're using now is simply to use Bitcoin. And I'm going to have to include in their crypto digital assets, they call it, to purchase these items from other countries. And I was thinking a bit more about this, and I'd like to bring it up that if you want to buy something from Germany, it's a process. It's kind of a headache and a hassle, and especially like wiring money to a foreign country.
Sure.
I will admit I've never done it, but I know people have done it, and it's just a headache. I mean, it can take days to get through all the red tape.
Yeah, it's not an easy process. I've done it on a limited basis, and it's never been easy.
Mm,
And Swift is a linchpin in that entire process. Swift
hmm
is a messaging system, almost in the same way that you could consider Bitcoin to be a messaging
hmm
system.
Exactly.
It allows the difference being that if you look at the slide, you've got Swift as the cloud in the middle. So it's obviously Swift is the central authority that's managing all of these payments. But what you're really doing is, if you look at all of these different types of financial institutions, you've got banks and insurance companies and pension funds and brokers and and custodians. All of these types of institutions can transact with one another basically by sending a message through the Swift system that says, okay, Main Street Bank in USA wants to their customer wants to send $100,000 to their customer in or their
Dubai.
vendor in Dubai, and that message goes through Swift, and the corresponding ledgers are adjusted, and that the Swift system kind of keeps track of that in a similar way that a blockchain might do it, but obviously in a centralized fashion. But I think I saw that last year there's an average of 42 million Swift messages being sent on a daily basis around the world. So and it's not just banking transactions; it could be transfers of securities, it could be all kinds of different financial transactions that don't necessarily involve cash.
hmm Yeah, it's looking at this, it's amazing the similarities between this and Bitcoin, and that Bitcoin is a messaging system. Like you said, Bitcoin is really just a ledger,
Mhm.
just much in the same way this is. I thought that was, on a side note, just pretty fascinating. But what we're seeing now from these countries that are being excluded from SWIFT is they're just going to find a way around it. And there's always been a way around it. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse. Certain countries that have been sanctioned end up in complete ruin. I would say like North Korea,
Sure.
but now with Bitcoin and other digital assets, there's always a way. So if I want to send money from the US to Dubai and I want to use Bitcoin to do that, it's no problem at all. I just need an address. It doesn't matter to me if it's in Dubai or uh, Virginia.
Rio. Yeah.
Maria. I mean, it makes no difference. And sending money internationally with Bitcoin is no different than sending money to your neighbor with Bitcoin.
Sure. It's
You know,
completely agnostic in terms of,
right,
there's no cross border limitations in that sense.
right. So how this plays out on the geopolitical landscape with Iran and Russia and probably some other bad actors that are going to keep using these digital assets, including crypto, to evade sanctions will be very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and I was going to ask you this. How do you view this in terms of how it hurts or helps Bitcoin? To see when this to me seems like some level of fodder for people who want to disparage Bitcoin. Oh well, it's only a way for countries who are intentionally alienated from the rest of the world to not be alienated. And I'm not really sure how I feel about that.
Well, look, there's always someone that has an argument, and there's always an argument to be made. And so you could say this, like let's just say hypothetically speaking, the, the world gets together, all 200 or so countries decide, okay, we are going to put an end to Bitcoin. You cannot interact with our banking system, you can't do anything. And even though they can't kill Bitcoin, because there's it's designed to stay alive.
Right.
Let's just say that they are able to dissuade the public from adoption. So the only people into Bitcoin are kind of like hardcore Bitcoiners. And so essentially Bitcoin is gone. So for the sake of this discussion, hypothetically, Bitcoin disappears, right? It becomes irrelevant. Okay. Well, then you have Ethereum and you have Cardano and you've got a whole list of other digital assets you can do the exact same thing with. If it's not Bitcoin, something else will inevitably be there, and not necessarily just one token. It could be numerous tokens will be there. So that argument, well, you know this. I mean, all the stuff that Bitcoin is used for crime, we know that that is not the case. It's a terrible tool to use for buying illicit substances or doing illicit actions because everything is traceable.
Sure.
So cash, by far, is used for the most illegal activities. It's not even, you could add up everything that's being done on every other platform altogether, and it will barely make a dent in how much cash is being used for drugs and weapons and whatever.
Yeah, I think
People do with these things.
The last estimate I saw was something like, if you look at organized crime, it's something like 80% or more of it is done in US dollar cash.
Yeah, and by the way, if you really want to look up something, just search the internet for like the fines that like Deutsche Bank have paid. I'll just give you one bank, just Deutsche Bank. They're involved with the drug dealers. They're involved with all of these bad actors, and they help them launder their money. So it's funny that Bitcoin has this anti-money laundering thing, where like it's funny that Bitcoin has this sort of anti-money laundering narrative and requirement, right? Stigma. But the biggest banks in the world have helped the biggest criminals in the world launder their money for decades.
Absolutely.
And in very large numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been caught doing it. It's not some kind of theory. It's just they've been caught, been punished, they get fined. It's kind of a funny situation. You make $10 billion doing something, and then they fine you $1 billion. People say, oh, look, this $1 billion fine, like they're really cracking down on them. Well, yeah, it's $1 billion fine, but they netted $9 billion.
Right.
No one went to jail. So this stuff goes on all the time, and a narrative like that, there's always going to be someone saying something silly and just trying to be a mouthpiece for the establishment. Never used that term before, but I think that it don't kid yourself that there aren't benefits for people to say things that maintain the status quo or just to knock down things that are new or better or that could actually help people. One of the things I think we've learned is that I hope this is not we're not trying to be controversial, but the government doesn't do a great job of helping people. I think Ronald Reagan said, yeah, 9 scariest words. Hi, I'm from the government. I'm here to help.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I will say this, though. I didn't like seeing it being Russia and Iran as far as the countries that were looking to do this. I don't like that. I would much prefer it if it was Brazil and Argentina agreeing to do this because they've been hurt by the dollar over the years, and they've both been hurt by really bad inflation over the years. So I would much prefer it to be like what I call like a non-bad state actor. Like Russia and Iran. They're two not good countries. So it's time will tell on this, but I when we see, the theme for tonight's show is change is coming. And I think that we can see that we've got the Federal Reserve making changes. Federal Reserve for the first time is going to introduce a product that is consumer facing.
Right. They've always been a wholesaler. Yeah.
Right. So that's a change. And now you're seeing these other countries who always had a way to do it. I mean, there's always a way to get around it. There are ways. And so now we're seeing Russia and Iran, two countries that have not been particularly friendly to Bitcoin, starting to use it for their own benefit to evade sanctions.
Right. So,
And
yeah.
it'll just spread.
Well, and that's what I was going to say. And, like you said at the beginning, our goal here is to be intellectually honest, and, we can recognize this can be, a use case for Bitcoin while also maybe not being the greatest example of who we want to be the use case for Bitcoin. But I think the key there is that as long as we continue to see adoption in different places in different ways, I'm not going to get too hung up on some bad actors doing things with Bitcoin that anybody can do with Bitcoin. It's still meant for everybody. And, I think you see that type of rhetoric, when you read Twitter and whatnot, that your enemies can use Bitcoin too. It's designed for everybody. It doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care who uses it. So from that standpoint, I don't have a problem with it. The problem is that these types of stories tend to get a lot more publicity than the exciting ones about really helping people around the world that need to be included in the financial system that aren't. And so, I think part of what we want to do is show both sides of that. And while there are these types of stories that that maybe aren't the best course of adoption news for Bitcoin, it's still adoption. So, it's like there's no such thing as bad publicity, right? It's all good. So anyway, anything else on that? You want to move on to the next couple of stories?
Let's move on.
Okay. The last two are really kind of small. Like we said, there wasn't a whole lot going on this week that was really that critical, but this was an interesting one. Indonesia is a new country that we haven't seen yet, and I don't think in our discussions. I think over the past few weeks, we're probably up to somewhere around a dozen countries that we've talked about. We should probably count and keep track of how many countries we report on here. But Indonesia's biggest tech firm is buying a exchange. Seems like a fairly small deal. It's a little under $8.5 million of a transaction to buy this exchange. But again, it is Indonesia, coming to the party.
Yeah, another country. It's just another country, and you start to realize that. And this is something I think we've done a good job of focusing on, is that this is a global type of adoption, and the U.S. is a very rich country. Indonesia is not a very rich country. In fact, this was only $8.38 million purchase, which we would see that kind of number doesn't really move the needle much in our country, but it just shows you that it's happening. This change is happening all over the world. And I don't think there's much more, for me, there's not much more to take from this, which is just that Indonesia is joining the party.
Yep. So welcome, Indonesia. All right. And then the last one, this one I thought was a little bit different than some of the other credit card type of products that we've talked about, or payment cards. Sorry, these aren't credit cards. But NearPay, which I believe is a Saudi company, is launching virtual cards through an app, an iOS and Android app, to allow Bitcoin and crypto users to spend their Bitcoin or other digital assets on their platform. And what I thought was interesting about this compared to the payment card stories that we talked about last week is that these are not prepaid cards where you're converting Bitcoin to fiat and then spending it. This is more like what we talked about with banks kind of becoming a one-stop shop for all of your money. So the idea that eventually you might have a checking account, a savings account, and a Bitcoin account. In this case, this is a similar type of environment where you'll have different types of monetary assets on the platform, whether it's fiat currency, cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, whatever. and you'll be able to use these virtual debit card products through the Visa network that will allow you to spend whichever asset you want, and convert it at the time of sale to the whatever fiat currency you're paying in. And this is, I believe, it's being offered in the UK, in the European Economic Zone, and only places that accept Visa.
And I think the unique thing about this is that this is not, like you said, this is not a prepaid card. You have an app on your phone, you pay for your transaction like you're using a Visa, and then it automatically pulls whatever digital asset you're using. We're going to say Bitcoin for this. It automatically pulls that out of your Bitcoin wallet to pay for the transaction. So it pulls your Bitcoin out, essentially converts it to fiat, and pays with fiat using the Visa network.
Yeah, and again, this is there's a custody issue that I have here. That we talk about a lot, is that you don't want to keep your Bitcoin in a custodial environment. You want it off of exchanges. You don't want it in a hot wallet. You don't want it connected to the internet. But at the same time, if this is going to continue to move forward, you have to have the ability to spend it and pay for things with it, whether that's using Lightning or whether that's using small amounts of Bitcoin. You need to be able to do that. So something like this, where you could have essentially spending money on a platform that you can then use somewhere that takes Visa, I think makes sense. I would just, again, this is something that you have to be careful with, and you don't want all your Bitcoin sitting on their platform, but maybe just enough to be able to use to spend, and then whatever your savings type of money is would be held somewhere offline in a cold storage and hopefully multi-sig scenario.
Yeah, I think this is to me, I think this is another off ramp. I think the off ramps are really important. There was an argument that people made before, said, okay, all these things, how do you spend them? What are you going to do with them? What can you buy with Bitcoin? And the answer is, at this point, you can load up a number of different Visa cards, mostly virtual. I think BitPay has an actual physical card. I'm sure there are other physical cards out there also, but considering the fact that you use a virtual card a lot more than you use a physical card, right? Anything you order online is virtual, etc. So the argument of how are you going to spend it, what are you going to do with it, these off ramps provide the answer to that, and they are important. Yep. So any new off ramp that we see, this is a bit of a creative off ramp where it's not prepaid and it's doing this on the fly conversion and it's pulling from your account. Obviously, there's some issues with that because you're giving this payment processor access to your wallet, which is something you'd only want to do with a very, very limited type wallet. But I think it's also important to keep in mind that, let's just say you had $1,000 in your short-term wallet that you would want to use for this. And let's say you make a $25 purchase. And they take $1,000 to clear out your wallet of your Bitcoin. Here's my question. How are you going to get it back?
Yeah, I don't know. So,
I mean, if you ask them to give it back to you and they say no, you're going to go through some kind of legal process. Of course, you can try to get your Bitcoin back, but Bitcoin transaction is permanent, and you would have to get someone else involved, maybe a court involved, to do this, and doing that for $1,000 is very difficult to get a court involved. So,
sure. Well, I think we talked about this last week with the I believe it was with the Sullivan Bank story, that they were offering some sort of insurance product, kind of like an FDIC type of thing. So I think that's something that I would hope you'll see come around as this kind of product evolves, where if you've got the money on that platform, there is some level of security in terms of if you lose it, if it gets stolen, you have some recourse, at least in the form of insurance. Again, it's never easy to make an insurance claim, no matter what kind it is. But if there is some level of kind of purchase protection, like you see with credit cards and debit cards to an extent, then maybe that's the direction it would need to head for people to really be comfortable with it.
Well, another thing is that if you steal your customers' money, it's not good for business.
Yeah, you're not in business too long.
Right. I mean, if you're a payment platform of any kind, and there's the word on the street is that your customers can't trust you with their money, it's not a good thing. But still, people need to be mindful of the fact that these things do happen. It's maybe they don't want to be a long-term business. Maybe they just want to steal a bunch of people's money
Right.
up front, get it to a certain point and run off with it. Stranger things have happened.
Well, we will see. All right. That was our last story. Anything else?
No, not really. I want to circle back to our theme, which is, that the change is here. And each week as we go through these things, we see what's there. We could see that even if we go backwards, we go back week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and see what's happening. There's a lot of change going on in the world right now. A lot. I think we're not just in the world of digital assets and Bitcoin and finance. The world is changing, and one of the biggest things to make the world go round is money. And that's what we're focused on. And the money is certainly changing. So ignoring everything else, just focusing on the money part, we're seeing, what we're seeing with Russia and Iran, I think, is a very interesting course of events. And I do not know how the Western world plans on dealing with this change. I mean, it's so easy for them to avoid sanctions right now that the U.S. needs a better game plan. And I think Russia has made that very clear, that the sanctions that were put on them for their invasion of Ukraine have probably hurt the Western world much more than they've hurt Russia.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where Europe's going to have a long, hard winter because of their energy needs and the fact that they're so dependent on Russia, and all of that is the way that they deal with that is going to be, I think, a big change in the world for sure.
But I'm saying, like, the old carrots and old sticks that existed on the geopolitical scene seem to be changing very, very rapidly. And I think we might be moving more towards commodity-based leverage and economies, which is another change.
Sure.
So I just think that when we look out over this landscape and see the different countries involved and see what's happening, certainly a lot of change going on, and very difficult to predict where it's going to go.
Yeah, I agree. So we'll just keep watching it and keep talking about it.
Right. All right, Matt. Well, can you tell people where to find us, please?
Absolutely. Website, btcbutlers.com. You can email us there, info@btcbutlers.com, or contact us directly through the contact sheet on our website. Our Twitter account @btcbutlers. DMs are open. If you are enjoying this podcast, please like, subscribe, share. Like Michael said, download the podcast. Last I heard, we are downloaded in 39 different countries. So we're really pleased and grateful for all of the listeners around the world. And if you want help implementing best practices as a Bitcoin owner, whether that's buying Bitcoin, how to store your Bitcoin, setting up an inheritance plan for your Bitcoin, or running your own node, Bitcoin Butlers is ready and able to help with a specific focus on inheritance planning, and our Sovereign Inheritance Planning Guide is available on our website as well. If you have questions, reach out to us, comment. We would always love to take questions for future episodes for topics of discussion, and we hope to hear from you.
All right, Matt, I think I lost you there. Oh, you're back. All right, Matt,
Yeah,
thank you. Until next time.
have a good one. Bye.
Bye.